The Montana sky stretched endlessly above the observatory, a canvas of dying light that reminded Dr. Helena Reeves why she'd left everything behind. The academic world had chewed her up and spit her out 3 years ago, laughing as they did it. Her theories about emotional quantum signatures had been called pseudoscience wrapped in poetry by Professor Whitmore at Cambridge. The journal rejections piled up until she stopped counting. Now, at 47, she lived alone on 20 acres of nothing, with only her instruments and the stars to keep her company. The observatory wasn't much, a converted barn with a retrofitted telescope and equipment she'd salvaged or bought secondhand. But it was hers. No tenure committees, no peer review boards filled with men who'd rather mock than listen. Just Helena and the universe, having a conversation nobody else believed was happening. She was calibrating the quantum resonance detector when she heard the truck. Helena rarely had visitors. The nearest town was 40 minutes away, and the locals had learned she preferred solitude. Through the window, she watched a battered Ford pickup park near the equipment shed. A man stepped out, lean and careful in his movements, like someone perpetually ready for danger. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the observatory dome. Helena recognized that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough. The expression of someone who'd come to the end of the world hoping to find peace, or maybe just silence. She met him outside. Up close, he looked younger than his posture suggested. Early 30s, perhaps. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly before he shoved them into his jacket pockets. Dr. Reeves? His voice was rough, unused to conversation. I'm James Sullivan. I called last week about renting your guest cabin, Helena remembered. A brief phone call, his words clipped and formal. He'd offered 3 months' rent up front and asked only one question. Would anyone bother him there? She'd said no. The cabin's ready, she said. Propane's full. Water heater works most of the time. James nodded, not quite meeting her eyes. Thank you. She should have gone back inside then. Should have maintained the careful distance she'd cultivated. But something about the way he held himself, like a man barely tethered to the earth, made her pause. There's coffee in the observatory if you want some. Gets cold up here at night. He looked surprised, then wary. I don't want to intrude. You're not. I'm just offering coffee. They sat in the small kitchenette she'd built into the observatory's lower level, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Helena learned he'd been a Marine, 3 tours that he didn't elaborate on. He'd been living in Seattle, working construction, but the noise and crowds had become unbearable. Needed somewhere quiet, he said, staring into his cup. Somewhere I could hear myself think. Helena understood that better than he knew. What are you running from? James's jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he'd leave. Instead, he said, myself mostly. The things I remember, the things I can't forget. That night, after James had gone to the cabin, Helena checked her instruments out of habit. The quantum resonance detector showed an anomaly, a spike in localized quantum fluctuations she'd never recorded before. She checked the timestamp. It corresponded exactly to when James had been sitting in her observatory. Helena frowned at the data. Probably equipment malfunction, except her equipment never malfunctioned. She'd built most of it herself, calibrated it obsessively. The readings were clear. Something about James Sullivan's presence had created a measurable disturbance in the quantum field. She should have dismissed it. Should have chalked it up to coincidence or instrument drift. Instead, she started a new file on her computer and titled it Subject 1. Over the next week, James kept to himself. Helena would see him sometimes, walking the property at dawn or sitting on the cabin's porch long after dark. He moved like a ghost, silent and careful, as if afraid of taking up too much space in the world. She found excuses to invite him over. Help moving equipment. An extra dinner she'd accidentally made too much of. Each time her instruments recorded the same phenomenon, quantum fluctuations that spiked in intensity when he was near, especially during moments when his carefully maintained composure slipped. One night, a nightmare woke them both. Helena heard the scream from across the property, raw and animal. She found James sitting outside the cabin, shaking violently, his face wet with tears he seemed unaware of. I'm sorry, he managed. I didn't mean to. Come with me, Helena interrupted. She led him to the observatory and showed him the quantum resonance detector's display. The screen blazed with activity, waves of energy pulsing in patterns she'd theorized about for years, but never successfully recorded. What am I looking at? James asked, his voice still unsteady. Helena's hands trembled as she pulled up the data. Proof, she whispered, that what you're feeling right now is real enough to bend the fabric of space-time. The weeks that followed transformed both of them in ways neither expected. James started spending more time in the observatory, initially just watching Helena work, but gradually asking questions. She explained her theories, how consciousness might interact with quantum fields, how intense emotions could create measurable distortions in space-time. He listened with an intensity that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with science in the first place, the pure wonder of understanding. So you're saying my nightmares are literally affecting reality? James asked one evening, studying the cascade of data on her screens. Not just nightmares, all of it. Joy, grief, fear, love. They're not just chemical reactions in our brains. They're events that ripple outward. Helena pulled up a visualization she'd been working on. Look at this. These spikes correspond to moments when you've been emotionally vulnerable around me. And these, she highlighted a different pattern, these happen when we're talking, when you're present and engaged rather than lost in memory. James leaned closer, his shoulder brushing hers. The detector immediately registered a surge. They both noticed. Was that? He started. Yes. Helena's voice was barely a whisper. That was us. Something shifted between them then. An acknowledgement of what had been building beneath their careful conversations and shared silences. James reached for her hand, hesitant, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. The detector sang with light. Over the following month, Helena documented everything. The quantum signatures that emerged when James smiled, truly smiled, not the careful mask he usually wore. The way the readings intensified when they sat together in comfortable silence, when he told her stories about his childhood before the war, when she shared her own history of academic exile and stubborn persistence. The data was extraordinary. The pattern suggested that emotional bonds created a kind of quantum entanglement between individuals, a literal connection that transcended physical distance. When James was troubled, even across the property, her instruments would register disturbances. When they were together, the readings became almost symphonic in their complexity. You realize what this means? Helena said one night, surrounded by months of compiled data. If I'm right, human connection isn't just meaningful in a poetic sense. It's a fundamental force, like gravity or electromagnetism. We're not just affecting each other psychologically. We're entangled at the quantum level. James looked at her with something like awe. And they called you crazy for believing this? They called me worse than crazy. They called me unscientific. Said I was letting romanticism corrupt my research. Helena's voice carried old bitterness. Professor Whitmore told the entire department I was an embarrassment to empirical science. He sounds like an idiot. Despite everything, Helena laughed. It felt good. James made her laugh more than she had in years. The detector, she noticed, always registered that joy. But as spring turned toward summer, James became quieter again. Helena recognized the signs, the longer silences, the way he'd stare at nothing, the nightmares that returned with renewed intensity. He stopped eating regularly, stopped maintaining the careful routines he'd established. One morning in late June, she found him sitting at the edge of the property, staring east toward where the sun would rise. Something about his stillness terrified her. James? He didn't turn. It's been 3 years. 3 years since Kandahar, since I watched my entire squad die because I made the wrong call. His voice was flat, empty. Morrison was 22. He had a baby girl he never met. Garcia was getting married that fall. Thompson played guitar and wanted to teach music after his service ended. Helena sat beside him, afraid to speak, afraid to stay silent. I think about them every day. James continued. Why did I survive? What makes my life worth more than theirs? I've been asking that question for 3 years, and I still don't have an answer. James, tomorrow's the anniversary. I wasn't planning to see another one. He finally looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was bottomless. But then I came here, and I met you. And for the first time since that day, I've felt something other than guilt and grief. Helena's heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if feeling better betrays their memory. I don't know if I have the right to be happy when they're dead. She took his hands in hers, holding tight. The morning air was cold, but his hands were colder. "Come with me, please. I need to show you something." Back in the observatory, Helena pulled up 6 months of data. She'd organized it into a visualization, a three-dimensional map of quantum fluctuations colored by emotional intensity. It looked like a galaxy, swirling patterns of light against darkness. "This is you," she said softly. "This is every moment you've spent here. The red patterns are trauma, grief, the weight you carry. But look at these." She highlighted threads of brilliant blue and gold that wove through the darkness. "These are moments of connection, of healing, of hope." James stared at the display, transfixed. "You asked what makes your life worth living," Helena continued, her voice shaking. "Here's my answer. This. You created this. Your pain is real, and it matters, and it's changed the literal fabric of reality. But so has your healing. So has every conversation we've shared. Every moment you've chosen to keep going despite the weight you carry." She zoomed in on a particular cluster of readings from the previous week. "This was when you told me about Garcia's terrible jokes. You were laughing and crying at the same time, remembering him with love instead of just grief. Do you see this pattern? It's unique. I've never recorded anything like it. It's beautiful, James. You're creating something beautiful out of unbearable pain." Tears streamed down his face. "I don't want to forget them." "You won't. You can't. They're part of you, part of this signal you're broadcasting into the universe." "But James, you're also part of this." She highlighted the strongest readings, the quantum entanglement patterns that had formed between them. "We're connected now, literally. Our emotions affect each other at the quantum level. If you end your life, you don't just erase yourself. You sever this connection. You silence a signal that's been traveling through space-time for months." He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past his own pain to her fear of losing him. "Stay," she whispered. "Not for them, not even for yourself. Stay for this, for what we're creating together. Stay and help me prove that love and connection aren't just chemistry, but fundamental forces of nature. Stay and help me show the world that what we feel matters, scientifically and absolutely." James pulled her close, and they held each other as the sun finally rose. The detector registered readings off the scale, a quantum storm of emotion so intense it would take Helena weeks to fully analyze. But in that moment, neither of them cared about the data. "Okay," James breathed against her hair. "Okay, I'll stay." The relief that flooded through Helena was physical, overwhelming. She'd come to Montana to hide from the world's judgment. Instead, she'd found someone who made her remember why science mattered, because it was the study of connection, of forces that bound the universe together, and right now, she was living inside the most powerful force she'd ever measured. The International Astrophysics Conference in Geneva felt like returning to a battlefield. Helena stood backstage at the convention center, her hands trembling despite the beta blockers she'd taken an hour earlier. Through the curtain gap, she could see them gathering, hundreds of the world's leading astrophysicists, quantum theorists, and cosmologists. Many of the same people who'd destroyed her career 3 years ago. James squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do this. The data speaks for itself." "No," Helena said firmly. "I spent 3 years hiding. Let them see me when I prove them wrong." Her name was announced. Dr. Helena Reeves, independent researcher. The polite applause felt like mockery. She walked onto the stage, connected her laptop, and faced the audience. Professor Whitmore sat in the third row, his expression already skeptical. 3 years ago, Helena began, her voice steadier than she felt, I proposed that human consciousness and emotion interact measurably with quantum fields. I suggested that feelings, love, grief, connection, create detectable distortions in space-time. I was laughed out of academia for it, a few uncomfortable shifts in the audience. Good, let them squirm. Today, I'm presenting 6 months of continuous data that proves I was right. She clicked to her first slide, the quantum resonance detector readings. These measurements were taken using equipment I designed specifically to detect localized quantum fluctuations at scales previously considered undetectable. The spikes you see correlate directly with documented emotional events. Professor Whitmore raised his hand. Dr. Reeves' instrument error could easily. I've calibrated against 17 known quantum phenomena. The error margin is 0.003%. These readings are real. She advanced to the next slide, the visualization of James's emotional landscape over 6 months. The audience went silent. This represents one individual's emotional journey mapped through quantum signature analysis. Each color corresponds to specific emotional states, verified through journaling and biometric data. Notice the complexity, the patterns that emerge. She highlighted the entanglement threads. And this is what happens when two individuals form a deep emotional bond. The data was undeniable. The patterns were too complex, too consistent to be random noise or equipment failure. Helena walked them through her methodology, her controls, her verification protocols. She showed them recordings from multiple instruments, all confirming the same phenomenon. But here's what changed everything, Helena said, pulling up her most recent data. 2 weeks ago, I contacted Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the Subaru telescope in Hawaii. I asked him to point his deep space quantum detector at specific coordinates at a specific time, when my test subject and I would be experiencing a moment of intense emotional connection. She clicked to the next slide. The room erupted in gasps. The deep space readings matched her localized data perfectly. The quantum signatures they'd been creating in Montana had been detectable from 5,000 miles away and had created measurable ripples extending into near-Earth space. Human emotion isn't contained within our bodies or even our immediate environment, Helena said, her voice ringing with conviction. It propagates outward like light from a star. We are literally broadcasting our feelings into the cosmos. Every moment of love, every instance of genuine connection. These are events that reshape reality at the quantum level. Professor Whitmore stood abruptly. This is impossible. You're suggesting that feelings have physical force. I'm not suggesting it. I'm proving it. Helena met his eyes. Gravity shapes space-time through mass. Electromagnetism operates through charge. And consciousness, human emotional consciousness, operates through quantum entanglement at scales we've never measured before. It's not mysticism, Professor. It's physics we simply hadn't developed the tools to observe. She clicked to her final slide, a compilation of data from observatories around the world. Over the past month, she'd quietly reached out to colleagues who hadn't completely abandoned her. Each one had run their own tests, pointing their instruments at the coordinates she provided during scheduled times when she and James would be together. Every single one had detected the same anomalous readings. This data comes from 14 independent observatories across 6 continents. They're all detecting the same phenomenon. Human emotional connection creates measurable, reproducible quantum effects that propagate through space-time. Helena paused, letting it sink in. We are not separate from the universe, observing it from outside. We are active participants, our feelings and connections literally shaping the fabric of reality. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. Then Dr. Patricia Wong from MIT stood and began to applaud. Others joined her. Within seconds, most of the room was on their feet. Professor Whitmore remained seated, his face red, but even he couldn't deny what the data showed. After the presentation, Helena was mobbed by researchers wanting to collaborate, to verify, to expand on her work. Grant opportunities materialized instantly. Journal editors who'd rejected her 3 years ago now begged for publication rights. The vindication should have felt sweet, but Helena found herself searching the crowd for the only opinion that mattered. James waited near the back, talking with Dr. Tanaka. When their eyes met across the room, Helena felt it, the familiar quantum surge that had become as natural as breathing. She excused herself and made her way to him. You did it, James said simply. We did it. None of this would exist without you. Dr. Tanaka smiled knowingly. I'll leave you two alone. Dr. Reeves, I'd love to discuss a collaboration. Perhaps over dinner. When they were alone, James pulled her into a quiet corridor. How does it feel? Being right? Helena considered the question. 3 years ago, being right would have been everything. Validation, redemption, proof that she wasn't crazy. But now, standing with James, feeling the invisible threads that connected them, she realized something profound. It doesn't matter as much as I thought it would, she admitted. What matters is that I found you, that we found this together. The scientific community can accept it or not. I know it's real because I feel it every day. Very unscientific of you, Dr. Reeves. James teased gently. Maybe. Or maybe that's the point. The greatest discoveries come from being willing to trust what we experience, even when it can't be immediately measured. She took his hands. I spent years trying to prove that love and connection were scientifically significant. But the real discovery wasn't in the data. It was in understanding that some things matter whether we can measure them or not. James pulled her close. So what now? Back to Montana. Eventually. But first I think we have work to do. Helena smiled. There are hundreds of researchers who want to verify this, to expand it, to understand what it means. And there are people out there like you were, suffering, isolated, convinced their pain doesn't matter. What if we could show them their feelings are literally reshaping the universe? That their connections with others create ripples that travel through space-time? You want to prove that suffering matters too? I want to prove that everything we feel matters. That we're not insignificant specks in an uncaring cosmos. We're active participants in creation itself, every moment of every day. Helena's eyes shone with tears and triumph. The elders of science laughed at me for believing human emotion had power. But they were wrong. We burn as bright as any star, and our light travels just as far. That night they stood on the hotel balcony overlooking Geneva. Somewhere above the light pollution, stars wheeled in their ancient dance. Helena's phone kept buzzing with messages, interview requests, collaboration offers, apologies from people who'd abandoned her. She silenced it and leaned against James. Do you still think about them? She asked softly. Your squad. Every day. But it's different now. I used to think surviving when they died made me a ghost. Half alive, haunting the world. But this work, what we've discovered, it helps me understand that grief and love aren't opposites. They're entangled. James looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the quantum signatures of every moment I spent with them still exist. Every laugh, every conversation, every bond we formed. It's all still traveling through space, becoming part of the universe's structure. They're not gone. They're woven into reality itself. Helena felt the familiar surge in her chest, the quantum entanglement that connected them growing stronger. And so are we. Every moment we've shared, every time we chose connection over isolation, every instance we transformed pain into something meaningful. It's all out there now, rippling through space-time. The signal we became, James murmured. The signal we're still becoming. Above them, invisible to human eyes but measurable by instruments across the globe, their connection blazed like fire across the cosmos. The quantum signatures of their love, their healing, their transformation, all of it broadcasting outward at the speed of light. Proof that human emotion was indeed a fundamental force. The scientific establishment had laughed at the idea that feelings mattered to the universe. They'd dismissed it as romanticism, as wishful thinking, as pseudoscience. But Helena Reeves had done what seemed impossible. She'd made the cosmos listen. She'd proven that when humans love, grieve, heal, and connect, the universe itself takes note, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, that signal continued to burn. A testament to the power of two broken people who found each other and, in finding each other, discovered that human connection was the brightest force in existence. The elders had laughed at humanity's fury, at the idea that feelings could shake the foundations of reality. But they hadn't understood. It wasn't fury that changed the universe. It was love. It was connection. It was the stubborn, beautiful, scientifically measurable fact that when two souls entangle, they literally set the heavens ablaze, and that fire would burn forever, traveling through space-time long after they were gone. Eternal proof that they had existed, that they had mattered, that their love had been powerful enough to reshape reality itself.